All right. Good morning, Doug. Today we have questions from viewers, but I want to start with a little update and your thoughts on Ukraine and what all is happening there right now.
Well, the most reliable indicator of what's actually happening may be the commodity markets and the financial markets in general. And I find it quite interesting that gold spiked up to around 1970 yesterday, and now it's back to slightly under 1900. So
Mhm.
people that are speculating in gold aren't too worried. All the grain futures are down a lot from having come close to hitting new highs. In fact, almost all the futures are down a lot. So people doesn't sound like people in the financial world are very worried about all this. It's
Yeah,
kind of over. So
yeah, that's true.
that's
I mean,
I find that kind of interesting.
it looked like it in the morning because things were wild yesterday morning
Oh,
for the opening, but
absolutely. Yeah,
but very quickly it just became very complacent again.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. So what's going to happen in the Ukraine? Well, as I said, my best guess of what was going to happen. I hope this doesn't look too ridiculous having these
Who
these
cares if it
dogs.
looks ridiculous?
Yeah, not going to go into descriptions of these dogs' personalities. I mean, that's not much interest to people out there in Europe. But so where was I before I?
Where do you think it? Where do you think this ends? Or
Oh, was it that? Yes. Well, my prediction a couple of weeks ago was that what do the Russians want out of this? What the Russians want, it seems to me, is a independent Lugansk and an independent Donetsk, and there'll be, little unrecognized states like Transnistria and South Ossetia and all these places that nobody's ever heard of. So that's what they'll turn into. That's what the Russians want. Just want a firm border between those places, which will be buffer zones, and the Ukraine, and to change the government of the Ukraine to something that's neutral to Russia favoring and not a member of the of NATO. That's not asking much. These are in a world of nation states. These are very reasonable requests. Now, whether the warmongers in the U.S. and really just the U.S. will make that possible, I don't know. But that's what should happen, and I think that's what will happen.
Yeah.
And they say the Russian army, and all we know is what we hear on the reported news, which who knows what's real or what's not. So the Russians, they were making a big deal. I was listening to that lame brain Jesse Waters last night, who really is a bum. I mean, I think Waters actually suffers from low intelligence. Proof of that was he was acting as a lickspittle to Petraeus, one of the most
Yeah.
dangerous generals that the U.S. has ever had, talking about the military issues. And it was mentioned that the Russians, at least at that time, had launched 160 cruise missiles into Ukraine, like this was the bombing of Berlin in 1945.
Right. Yes.
You only use cruise missiles against specific high-value targets, which would be military targets.
Exactly.
Cities are being bombed, or the Red Army is invading Berlin again, that type of thing. So my guess is what's going to happen is that the Russians will, the Red Army will retreat back to Russia's boundaries. They'll install a friendly to neutral regime. There'll be a border from around those two provinces, and Crimea will officially become part of Russia again, and status quo ante. Except, there'll still be warmongering and drum beating against Russia. So I think it'll blow over. That's my
Okay.
guess.
Okay. Yeah, as long as we don't do something stupid to escalate, I think that's probably true. But there were a couple of data points, I guess, some things I saw that I think are worthy of mention about what's going on in Ukraine, and they don't have anything to do with the combat situation there or anything else. It really is just the response of the Ukrainian government, to this, you know, crisis, or this invasion that they're experiencing, and the two things are: number one, that they suspended all electronic bank transfers, within Ukraine and out of Ukraine. So
That's great. Yeah. So if you're in the Ukraine, you can't get your capital out of the country.
right,
And
exactly. So you're being invaded by a foreign enemy, but your domestic government is disallowing you access to your capital. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, a lot of people, you got to wonder which one is hurting the average Ukrainian more, honestly, if they can't get access to their capital.
yeah, it's really so perverse. They say, well, we're defending freedom. Well, I'd like to know where this freedom is. It's certainly not in
Exactly.
Ukraine. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And not only that, but they forbade military age men between 18 and 60 from leaving the country.
Yeah. Well, you don't want to be in a country, you don't want to live in a country where governments think they have a right to do that type of thing. So it's actually shameful. If a Martian were to look at this situation, other than the fact that the Russians have actually taken the first step and actually launched an invasion, okay, that's wrong, shouldn't have done it. But looking at everything else surrounding the situation, other than the actual invasion, I'd say a Martian would say, yeah, I think the Russians are on the right side of this issue.
Yeah, or maybe that both governments are collaborating to harm civilians. That both of them are working to do it. They're doing it in different ways, but they're both collaborating to do it. And at the end of the day, these nation states, we plebs, are just pawns in the game.
Exactly. What they're all about is preserving the state itself, and we're just little pieces, pawns to
Right.
be moved around. They don't care about us.
Right.
That's just rhetoric.
And I love how they play up the patriotism propaganda, in order to get you to sacrifice everything for the state, when the state is locking people in, who are trying to leave, and locking their capital, their families, savings. It's
In
amazing.
fact, if you're a Ukrainian, your enemy today is not the Russians. They're going to go away. Your enemy is the Ukrainian government.
That's right. That's right. And one of the things, so about this, there's one of the things that was interesting is that it was pretty clear that something was going to happen in Ukraine for the last few months. I mean, there's been this increasing buildup of troops there, and you didn't know what it was going to be exactly, and what Russia was going to do, but it seemed as though something was going to happen. And up until Putin announced specifically that he was going to invade, Ukraine proper, not just those two provinces, there was basically a deep sense of complacency in the people in Kiev. And it was, and there were all these video reports about how everyone's just acting like it was totally normal, and all of that. And like, that's rational, I guess, because they don't know, they're not making a big deal out of it. But then as soon as Putin announces it, you have people trying to leave like crazy. Let me show you just one picture here. Like, there's miles and miles of cars trying to get out of the country. I don't know if you can see
Oh,
this
yes, it's
picture
quite
here.
amazing, actually.
Yeah. And it's like, of course, it's impossible to leave when everyone's trying to leave.
Yeah.
But like, what is it about humans that make us unprepared to predict, changes like this? That's like it's like the Polish, picnicking on Sunday before the Nazis roll in after they've been, building on the border for years or for months and months. Like, what is it about humans that make us do these stupid things?
Well, they forget to observe the 6 Ps, to wit, proper planning prevents piss poor performance.
Yeah,
And those people that are in their cars in that traffic jam, uh, how many of them are going to run out of gas, and then it'll
exactly.
become an immovable traffic jam? I mean, yeah,
And then and they could have left.
it's not
They
good
could
to
have.
be in a potential war zone.
Well, they could have left 8 hours earlier, no issues. No traffic 8 hours earlier. Nobody panicking, no one overreacting. There weren't yet restrictions on moving capital out of the country. There weren't restrictions yet on moving yourself out of the country. So, I mean, you had, travel rights, and I know a lot of Ukrainians don't have those ability to travel without visa or anything. So, but still, like, they could have up until that point, but it's like this normalcy bias that people have where people, disbelieve bad information, or I think it's a kind of, oh, they just assume that tomorrow will be like yesterday. That's very destructive. And I mean, people.
Pretty much like the commodity markets yesterday. They all went
Mm,
insane, and today they've gone back to normal.
back to normal.
So
Yeah.
that's
I
what
guess
I
people
think is
are.
going to happen. That's what I think is going to happen in the Ukraine, unless the Jacobins in Washington do something really stupid,
Hmm,
which is always
quite
possible.
possible. Okay. All right. So someone asks, what country do you think will withstand the next few years the best?
Hmm. I would think that it's going to be an isolated country, that the government gets the idea that they want to stay out of the fray. Okay.
Hmm,
So, what kind of a country would that be? Well, Switzerland has always been the best choice in Europe because that's like in the national culture to not get involved in foreign wars. We're talking about whether we're talking
Sorry,
about.
Doug. Sorry, Doug. You faded out for a second there. So can you start that over? It was like, what country do you think would survive? You said a country out that could stay out of the mix. That's where we lost you.
Exactly, exactly. The one that when there's a barroom brawl going on, walks out of the saloon and doesn't start throwing chairs with everybody else.
Hmm,
So a country that has the national culture of, say, Switzerland, which has stayed out of this for several hundred years. It's the way the government thinks, it's where the way the people think. That'd be the best choice in Europe. Country that would be like that. Preferably a country that's not a member of NATO, that their government doesn't feel obligated to direct troops to whatever ridiculous dust up there might be. So forget about NATO, which I'll say it again, should have been abolished with the collapse of the Soviet Union and is now actually a major reason why this whole thing is happening in the Ukraine, because certain people want Ukraine to be part of NATO, for God's sake, which is
hmm.
absurd and ridiculous, and is really what set this whole thing off more than anything else. So, country like Switzerland, but what country might that be specifically? Well, here we are in Uruguay, which was actually formed as a buffer zone between Argentina and Brazil. And they don't have a military or a navy worth even talking about, frankly. I mean,
Hmm.
it kind of exists, but you have no evidence of it.
Yeah.
So South America, Uruguay, for that reason, is not a bad choice. Where else in the world can you go?
You mentioned Thailand one other time because they're just because of where it's positioned and they've kind of stayed out of the fray for the most part in the past.
Yeah, that's right. And it's basically the only country in Asia that wasn't conquered by colonialists at some point.
Hmm.
So that's interesting. Of course, Thailand's got its own problems. It's got an ongoing, Muslim rebellion of some type in the southern provinces and so forth. Yeah, that would be a good one in Asia. Where else would you go? It used to be New Zealand looked so good, but they popularly elected a communist as
Justin Trudeau's classmate at the World Economic Forum, Young Leaders.
yeah, exactly. You can run, but you can't hide at this point, really.
Yeah.
The best thing you can do is rather than put all your eggs in one or even two baskets and kind of like stake out a fort, it's to the best of your ability, try to be air mobile and try to be rich. That's really important because if you're a poor person, you're a refugee when you got to get out of Dodge. If you're a rich person, you take a private
You have
jet.
options.
Yeah, you have
Yeah.
options. So that's easier said than done, but that should be the objective in unstable times, is to have enough money and put it in places where your government can't get to it or lock it down. And that's the best way to insulate yourself. There is no magic place where you're okay. I mean, look, if I was an Icelander, I think I'd be probably pretty happy with that situation.
Yep.
They're not, I don't, they're not a member of any group. They're isolated. They all get along. You know, they don't have massive waves of migrants that are creating chaos within the country. So
Right.
that's a good
Yeah,
choice.
that's it. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. We never really talked about that before, but it seems obvious once you say it.
Yeah. So Portugal, not a bad choice, out on the western edge of Europe. They've kind of learned their lesson from defending colonies. They went through a very chaotic time back in the 70s. There might still be some lingering appreciation of that. I suppose, is Ireland a member of NATO? I don't even know.
Hmm. I don't know that either. I would assume that they were, but
You think so, but maybe not. Yeah, anyway, places like that are
yeah,
worth.
that's good. Those are good. Those are some new options. Yeah, so they've been a member of NATO Partnership for Peace program since 1999. That's what it says.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
Anyway,
All right.
but
So someone says here that last week you mentioned that the most of the peasant revolts did not end well for the peasants, other than the fleeing the state like our founding fathers did, or the long game of education for which Ron Paul advocates. What other strategies seem to be successful in overturning tyranny?
well, I guess that's in the we'll have to find out department, because my hobby, as I've mentioned a number of times in the past has been going to shithole countries and getting an appointment with the guy that runs the country. Military dictators are the best people to talk to, and trying to convince them to put into effect a plan that would make them turn them from being a pariah to a world figure, and turn the country into Hong Kong on steroids. And you know, it was a neat plan, and I've had lots of fine adventures trying to do that thing. And in fact, we even tried that together in
You did.
the obscure country of Palau, which I
Yes.
warned, not one person out of 100 even knows is an actual independent country. It's a member of the United Nations and all that.
I didn't know the first time you mentioned it to me. I was like, "What are you talking about, Palau?" And I wrote it down. I'm thinking I was an idiot, that because I didn't know what it was. I went to look it up later. The first time you mentioned it to me.
Well, it's nice that in the world there are 200 countries, and most people don't know that most of them exist.
Yeah.
And I hope that in the decades to come, it turns out that there's 400 countries around the world, or 600, like Mao said, let 100 flowers bloom.
Flowers bloom. Yes.
Well, this is the best solution. I mean, you can't find a particular place, because I've often told the story, but maybe not everybody's heard it, about, perhaps apocryphal or not, of some guy, an American, that saw World War II coming. And he said, well, I want to go someplace which is so far out of the way. World War II, things were a lot slower back then, that they will not find me. So he picks the island of Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands. Seemed like a good idea at the time.
Not such a good idea, in fact. Probably one of the worst places he could have ended up.
Yeah, just about.
Okay, let's see here. There's a lot of talk about Marxism. They want to know if you can elaborate more on the differences between cultural Marxism and economic Marxism.
Okay, well, Marxism. I think it got traction. Can't believe it's because of that of Das Kapital that Marx wrote, which is 3 fat volumes, which I've actually met one person in my entire life that claims to have read all 3 fat volumes, and nobody does that. But the reason why Marx got traction and previous socialists, which were all called utopian socialists.
Hmm.
Marx claimed to be a scientific socialist.
Oh,
And his books were to prove the inevitability of socialism taking over the world. So that kind of made Marxism different because it was inevitable. And it was kind of like, was able to make it effectively into a religion. But then as time went on, when the first country to actually put it into practice, which was the last country he would have picked. I mean, he thought that socialism would inevitably come from capitalism. I mean, feudalism evolved into capitalism, capitalism evolves into socialism, socialism evolves into communism. So Marx would have said, if he'd been alive, that Russia would have been the last place in the world that would have had a scientific socialist revolution. Well, it wasn't. So they had to change the plan. And then it became Marxism, Leninism. And then Stalinism changed it to Stalinism, and Mao changed it to Maoism. They're all Marxists. But it's a goofy idea that that just took on a life of its own, because Marx said it was going to be inevitable. Now the question, I guess, was cultural Marxism. Well, since the fall of the Soviet Union, just about everybody in the world, except a few thousand American college professors, basically found that the state owning the means of production just doesn't work. Everything will collapse. Okay, so that's kind of been put aside, and they're happy to have basically a fascist solution where private parties own the means of production, but the state controls and taxes and regulates them. So they put that aside, but we can still have cultural Marxism, which is all about dividing the country into classes. Well, if classes, well, how about races too? That helps. I mean, that's the latest. This is like a moving crap game. We have these psychologically ill people that are always trying to impose some type of a system on the world at large. So I don't know if that's the answer to the question, but a rational person doesn't take socialism and communism seriously. They're things for people with serious psychological aberrations. Okay? Actually, the crazy people in many cases.
well, it seems like, unfortunately, then there must be most people must be very irrational, because people are taking these ideas very seriously in one form or another today.
You're right. We live on the planet of the crazy chimpanzees.
Yeah.
I'm just asking myself personally, I said, what have I done in a past lifetime, presuming I've had one, to merit my living here on the planet with all these crazy chimpanzees? I mean, there's got to be trillions upon trillions, maybe trillions of other planets in the universe. Why this one? Anyway, I guess I'll find out soon.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. So this one here says, the guy says, guy he says he's unvaxxed, living in Canada. His wife and his kids are vaccinated. I will only contemplate getting the vaccine as a means of escaping my current imprisonment in Canada, he says. What currency should I be saving my money in to protect my family for the future?
Well, none of them are any good, frankly. I mean, they're all floating abstractions. They're all just pieces of paper that are backed by the goodwill of the politicians that run a government. So there is no good currency. But that said, it has been true for decades, many decades, and I guess it's still true today, is that the Swiss franc is probably the most stable currency in the world, as it has been in the past. I mean, before 1971, when Nixon devalued the dollar, the Swiss franc was officially valued at 23 cents. Okay. Today, the Swiss franc is bouncing around at $1.05, something in that area. And
Hmm.
it's not as well managed as it used to be. For instance, one of the largest hedge funds in the world is actually the Swiss Central Bank, which has a huge position in Apple and shares like that. Hey, they guessed right.
Hmm.
I don't know if they still have them, but
Hmm.
look, you really want to own gold and have that gold stored offshore in several safe places as well as your own possession. But wait a minute. When I say that, we're getting down to, gee, you have to have a lot of money to make that feasible as a practical matter. So the answer, of course, isn't to ask what's the best currency, because that's going to change anyway, but it's make sure that you've got a lot of money. In fact, this reminds me, I when I met Ayn Rand, it was at her last public appearance where she gave her last speech. And some crazy chimpanzee in the audience asked, figuring that he had the question that was going to stump her, Miss Rand, what do we do about the poor in your society? And her answer was, don't be one of them. And she disregarded this. And that's really the answer to all these questions of this nature, I think.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I think, I can hear people's like objections about it for people who, don't have much money who are watching this, and they're probably have a visceral negative response to that. But, if you have a visceral negative response to it, I think it's because you really feel that you have no say in your lot in life. You have no control over, the amount of, savings you have. And I personally can't believe that that's true, because everyone I know everyone can save more than they currently do. Everyone could spend less than they currently spend. And if, certainly the more things you could do for more income, but you have to start looking at those things first. Everyone has a cell phone plan that's ridiculously expensive, and it's just a tracking device in their pocket. Most people have car loans and they have debt on that. Most people have all kinds of stuff, and yet they'll complain about not having money. And the people I know who have been able to pull themselves out of nothing, they did a very good job of saving half of the money they made when they were poor. Half of the money they earned, they saved. They didn't spend it and upgrade their lifestyle.
That's exactly right. Because when I started out, I actually had nothing. Well, I had the title to my car and I had some clothes, and that was it. And I did exactly that. I maintained a low standard of living until I could put together a grub stake. You have to do it. If you don't want to do it, then you're always going to be poor.
Right.
Unless
And
you get lucky.
it's up to you.
Unless you start some scammy cryptocurrency and become an overnight.
But Doug, I think that now just you'll be temporarily rich. You'll be like the lottery winners, that are back to the trailer in 2 years after winning the lottery. I mean, if you don't learn these habits of thrift and savings and understand the risks associated with debt and all that, then you're destined to be poor.
That's right. And I'll bet most of the most of the slumdog millionaires and cryptocurrency billionaires out there, they bought their Lamborghini, and this is one of the reasons why I think Lamborghinis are going to be thick underfoot in barns with owls roosting under the hood in the years to the future, because they'll lose it all.
I agree. Okay. Let's see. Someone asks, you mentioned that you recently moved from Aspen to Virginia, and they're curious as to what your thinking was behind moving. Did you look at other states, that you thought might be freer, and I guess what was your decision-making process in it? I think I know the answer to this, but people are curious.
Yeah, well, actually, I live in Uruguay, and in the past I've spent a lot of time in Argentina, but it's inconvenient at the moment. That'll change. But I still have a tail of the skink, if you would, in the US, because I like the northern summer, in addition, when it's winter down here. So why did I choose Virginia? Gee, maybe it's like being a salmon swimming upstream, because even though I was born and raised in Chicago, I spent a lot of time in the Washington, D.C. area, and Virginia is much more desirable from every point of view than Maryland. And I particularly like the shoreline. I like the Chesapeake Bay. And I chose that. And culturally, I don't know, they have these charts and surveys that say which are the freest states in the US. And it usually turns out to be what? I guess New Hampshire, Wyoming, and Florida, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
And Virginia's kind of in the middle of the pack. But as with most of these states, you got to realize that a state's a big thing. And in the case of Virginia, the population is mostly centered around
The
three or
Beltway.
four. Yeah, the Beltway, the Washington Beltway, Loudoun County, Fairfax County, I don't know, the rest, Arlington County, the rest of them. And it's full of government employees. So, and Richmond, of course, like any capital, they more government employees, but the rest of the state is, kind of good old country folks, people that 150 years ago would have formed the Army of Northern Virginia, which, of course, I live in Southern Virginia, but so it was an arbitrary choice, quite frankly,
Okay.
just because I like the weather, like the culture, and I don't have to spend too much time there, which I don't.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Somebody says another person who lives in Canada. We're getting more people from Canada writing in over the last few weeks with all the craziness that's gone on there. I said, I live in Canada, and so you know the issues I'm facing. The question is where to go. Maybe it's too late to get out. I hope not. I have been researching and listening to podcasts, but it seems others are also in a quandary and searching. I believe I need to avoid G20 countries where the UN and maybe the globalist stuff has more influence. A small self-contained country or island that flies under the radar with little debt, so the IMF can't call in their loans and come in and steal their assets and resources. And this person actually did say that they have been to Estancia de Cafajate, and they met you there at one point and said thank you for being such a gracious host when I guess I had dinner with you there. But where do you think someone like that should go, I guess? And I guess maybe this is just the same, maybe this is the same answer to the question we had a little bit ago about neutral countries.
I think it is the same answer, but let me supplement it perhaps by saying you shouldn't just pull up roots and transplant arbitrarily to some place. The only way to do this is to spend a lot of time traveling. You're going to wind up living in hotels and B&Bs and things of this nature as you wander around a suitable country and get to know a lot of people. And we've discussed how you get to know a lot of people in various countries in the past. So you can't just pull up roots and transplant. That usually doesn't work out as well as you might like.
Yeah, I've had some people ask me for in our Telegram group asking me for like realtors in Uruguay, so that they could start looking at properties, thinking of relocating here. And my response to them is, it's looking at realtor right now should be pretty irrelevant for you. You shouldn't be looking to buy something when you haven't spent enough time here. You need to come here and stay for a month or whatever and look around and see if you like the place at all. I mean, it might not just jive with you at all.
Yeah, exactly. Although I've got to say, good realtors in Uruguay are very, very hard to find.
It's true.
But they exist. But yeah, that's the idea. You say, gee, this place seems interesting. You've got to come down here and rent a car for a month. Mostly you can just rent crappy little cars that are, not really much fun to drive, but drive around the country and yeah, that's the way you do it.
Yeah. Okay. You shared with me an essay that you found a couple of weeks ago that basically broke down the division in society, in Western society, into two categories. One was the physicals and the others was the virtuals. Now I shared that with our Telegram group. And so this question is relating to that. And I'll actually put a link to it in the description of this video. I think it'd be worthwhile for people to read that. The question is, it's clear to me that the strategy of the virtuals is based completely on an incessant pack of lies and therefore ultimately fatally flawed, despite the blind gullibility of the majority. Is this a valid assumption that they will collapse? a question of timing as usual? If so, when?
Hmm. Yeah, so are the elite going to be able to stay the elite? Well, if they do, it'll mainly be by using force, which means the state and the elite are generally really solid statists. They want to maintain the status quo. Um, I'm an eternal optimist, so I'd like to I'd like to see the situation overturned. But then again, I don't want to see it overturned because that would be chaotic, and nobody likes chaos. So hard to answer that question, I think.
Okay. Okay. Did you have any other thoughts on that essay? Because I know you shared it with me, and I don't know if there was anything we hadn't talked about it though. I don't know if there was anything that you found particularly interesting about it, if you can recall.
I'd have to read the thing again.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think it was
Yeah,
just basically talking about the truckers being like the people who work in physical reality versus the people who work in the bloggers of the world who work in ideas and abstract.
yeah,
'Cause-
yeah. Well, I'm definitely on the part of the physical reality people, although sadly, uh, I'd be classed as part of the virtual people. So there's a contradiction there. I know. I don't know how to overcome that contradiction.
Okay. So someone says here, um, what do you think about Morocco and its monarchy? Is it a good place to start a new business as an expat?
Well, many years ago, I did, in fact, ride the Marrakesh Express. And I went, where did I visit? Casablanca. That's where all the planes land. And I went to Rabat and I don't know, the other cities there in Morocco and Fez, which is really, I thought, the most interesting city there, and hung around, and it was a lot of fun. And but that was a long time ago, and I think the country's changed tremendously. In fact, I just saw a travelogue on. I just saw a travelogue that dealt in part with Morocco, and it had scenes from Marrakesh. Nothing like the Marrakesh of 50 years ago, I promise you.
Hmm.
You can forget about you know that Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young song. I mean, it's become a big damn city full of tourists, and
Hmm.
it's expensive. But you still got people that live on a pretty basic level outside of the cities. I mean, I remember when I was there, I rented a car and just decided to, I don't know where I was at the time. I must have been in Marrakesh, and just drove off into the desert for hours, up into the Atlas Mountains, across the Atlas
Hmm.
Mountains. And what do you know? I find this abandoned city there. I'm the only person there, absolutely the only person there, and it's made out of mud. And I don't know when they'd abandoned it before that, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. And it's like, I don't know, probably 100 buildings there. And I said,
Wow.
this is really interesting. And back in those days, um, well, if you've seen the picture of The Man Who Would Be King, that was filmed in Morocco. And a lot of the stuff that you see as background in The Man Who Would Be King was Morocco, primitive place.
Hmm.
The Wind and the Lion, another Sean Connery. Well, those are Sean Connery. I just got to say this. I had an opportunity to meet Sean Connery once when we were the only two people in a restaurant having breakfast together. And I thought, he's a really interesting guy. And he's made three movies, which I thought were just superb. Three of my favorite movies. They were The Wind and the Lion, filmed in Morocco, um, uh, Robin and Marion, which is revisionist history of the Robin Hood legend, really well done too. And
Man who would be
uh,
king.
The Man Who Would Be King, filmed in Morocco also. So I was going to walk up to him and say, Mr. Connery, I really appreciate these three movies you made, because uh, he was rather famous for not wanting to be identified as James Bond.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to say to him, and incidentally, kudos for supporting the Scottish independence movement, which he was pretty rabid about. Although the Scottish independent movement, at least then, and I'm sure still now, was was all about socialism and nationalism.
Yeah.
But still, better to have England be, or Great Britain be, divided into Scotland separate. So, and who knows, it might have been the start of a beautiful friendship. But
But you didn't do it.
I know. I don't know. Usually I will, especially since we were the only two people in the restaurant
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
that time.
It's kind of a weird situation though, because if there's somebody if there's someone who's famous who you respect, you kind of like don't really want to bother them.
Didn't want to bother him. That's
But at
right.
the same time, it's an interesting coincidence.
Yeah, exactly. And for all I know, he was suffering from boredom because everybody else felt the same way. And anyway, take a minute of a person's time. Anyway, that ship has sailed because Connor was dead at this point.
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
Anyway, getting back to Morocco. The last person I met from Morocco, I mean, look, my data on the place is way, way out of date. I haven't been there for, shockingly, like 45 years or something like that.
Wow.
So, and the whole world has changed totally in that time. But the last Moroccan I met happened to have been in Paris when I was trying to get to the Central African Republic. And this guy was somehow involved in the revolution that was going on there in the CAR. Probably just as well I didn't get there. The planes weren't flying because there were thousands and thousands of refugees who were piled into the airport where there were blue helmets that would keep them from getting hacked up with machetes. So it was a crazy place. But anyway, so I spent like half a day with this Moroccan that insisted that what needed to be done was $50 million. That was the number he came upon to support the ruling government. Where I talked to a lot of their officials who were all hanging out in Paris, the chief of police, and I don't know who else I met there. And it would have been a non-starter because the ruling government at that time, they were all Mohammedans. They were all Islam. They weren't Islamists. They were just Muslims. But most of the country were either animists or Christians. And since then, they've been ousted. I don't know who runs that place right now. But that was in the aftermath of Emperor Bokassa having been, I don't know if he got killed or not.
I have no idea.
He was famous for having human body parts in his refrigerator, they say.
Really? Wow. Yeah, I guess that makes a statement.
Yeah. Well,
it's something like that. If you have that as a rumor, it's almost as good as the real thing, right?
Yeah. And I think he changed the name of the place from Central African Republic to Central African Empire because he was the emperor. Sort of the logic to that. Anyway, that's not talking about Morocco. That's just my last tenuous
connection
with Morocco. Don't know.
Okay. Well, if any of our viewers have some recent boots on the ground experience in Morocco, just please, comment in the comment section below and let us know, because I'd like to hear kind of an update on the place.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's see. Somebody here, another young person, someone who says they're in their 20s. We get one of these at least every week. Somebody a young person, also Canadian. He says they don't have, no experience and skills. So the question is, how do you network with successful and rich people? What are the common mistakes that newbies make when networking? And number two, how do you choose a mentor in any field like engineering, finance, etc.? And what are the mistakes that people make when trying to get a mentor?
Well, you're not going to network with rich and successful people unless you can bring something to the party. Now, in order to do that, you've got to have a significant store of knowledge in your head. So that means you got to read a lot of books, or, today watching videos of various type, I think they've actually become in many ways the new book.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like they're like little documentaries you can find, that go into great detail about different subjects. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what you need to do is get yourself an education. And clearly, having gone through the state school system for the last 18 years, well, 12 years, I guess, didn't do much good. So you've got to transform yourself mentally and add something there. So you have something to talk about and something you can bring to the party. And then you've got to have experience. And, there you are in Canada, maybe, on the windblown plains south of Edmonton, for all I know. I mean, so you've got to get out and see stuff and have experiences that when you're talking to this potential mentor, he's got something to work with. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
I'd suggest.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if they want to talk to you, I mean, it's time's value. They don't just do you a favor by giving you an education when you haven't given yourself one.
That's right. And they can't give you one something that our friend Porter often says, he says, there is no teaching, there's only learning, is the way he frames things a lot. Like someone can't give it to you. You have to acquire knowledge and skills. You have to have the desire and the thirst and the curiosity for that. And, if you don't, then sometimes it's the desire and curiosity that actually can be a key part of what makes you interesting to interesting people. You know what I mean? The people you want to know, you have to be interesting. And you be interesting by doing interesting things, acquiring interesting skills. I mean, if you're in your 20s, you don't have anything really going on. Like come up with some adventure for yourself or whatever it is. Like come up with something. Go somewhere. Do something. And yes, I know the world is crazy and more difficult right now. But get off the computer and go on a motorcycle ride. Down through South America or something. I mean, do something, do anything to get out of this pod you're in now, or else there's no chance that you'll kind of run into some opportunity along the way.
Yeah, exactly. It depends, and it depends on how wild and crazy you want to get. I mean, if you're really bored,
If you're a Tom Dyson type person, right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Or if you're, depending on how early in your 20s you are, you can do something really insane. Like you can go to Marseille and join the French Foreign Legion. I mean, they probably won't take you. If you're an American, they almost certainly wouldn't take you.
It's Canadian.
But Canadian,
Canadian's
so
got a better shot.
Better shot. Yeah. And it'd probably be a huge mistake and you'd be really sorry that you did it. But you can always desert, although if you do.
Well, it's a few, but like if you don't have anything going on, I mean, it's not a bad option for a young man who doesn't have a lot going on. You go there, yes, you have there's like a 15% or 10% chance of being injured or killed, I think, but you will come out a different human being with a wholly different view on the world and opportunities. I mean, those also, the veterans of the Legion all have a number they can call. If they find themselves in trouble later, they can get help from their fellow, ex-legionnaires. I mean, that's one a retired French Foreign Legion officer told me that and showed me the number in a card he had actually in his wallet. So, I mean, that's kind of a nice thing to have and certainly create some interesting stories.
It is. You'll absolutely be the only kid on the block that's done that.
Yep.
Although I'm sure after you've done it, you'll feel sorry you did it most of the time.
Most of the time, probably. But still, would you feel more sorry, Doug, than sitting at home, on your computer watching YouTube videos?
No, absolutely not. I mean, you got to do it. You got to take a shot.
Yeah, your 20s the 20s are the critical decade. There's a book called The Defining Decade, where this woman talks about the 20s and how they set up your entire life. Your trajectory is set in your 20s because you basically can endure things that in your 20s that you cannot endure outside of that. You're not burdened by so many obligations in life yet. You have tons of energy. Like people are, it's more accepted in the society for you to be, digging around trying to find something and make it work. You have little to lose, I mean, but if you get that trajectory right, then it's just about not making any catastrophic error and things get better and better and better. So you can't waste your 20s.
No, well said. And I'm afraid most people do waste their 20s. I mean, they get a dead end job and they spend all their money drinking and chasing girls, and before they know, they're in their 30s and things get tougher from that point.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's see. A couple other questions here, Doug. Someone says, I know you guys are long physical commodities and hard assets as well as hedged, but I wanted to touch on crypto since it has come up again with the Canadian emergency powers and financial asset seizure recently. Has Doug ever considered the possibility that crypto might be one of the biggest psyops in human history? It's hard not to believe the government would have suspected people would eventually fear inflation and may have created an alternative that would help absorb the capital flight, but do nothing to harm the system. Yeah. So do you think it's possible that it's a psyop, that it's a trap?
Well, I'm probably the wrong person to ask about cryptos. I mean, you're the right person to ask about it because I only got into them in 2017 when I could, even though I was introduced to them,
Very early.
2013. Yeah, oh well, that's water under the bridge. I didn't understand the value proposition of Bitcoin back then, although I like the idea. But look, I'm not sure which of these cryptos actually have value because they're what? How many of them are there? How many thousands are there?
I think there's like 6,500 or 8,000, something in that number. Last I
Like that,
checked.
right. And many of them have market caps of tens of millions, even hundreds of millions. And they don't serve any useful purpose. They're trading sardines is all they are.
Yeah.
So it seems to me like a bubble that's going to blow up. And once again, I know even less about NFTs, but I'd say that that's doubly true of NFTs. Now, Bitcoin is a different proposition, and there may be some others that would fall in that category too. But
Do you think it's a trap, though? Do you think it's like, so, some people say that maybe it was, the NSA or, the CIA made Bitcoin, put it into the wild.
it seems very unlikely to me.
Yeah.
It really does seem very unlikely to me. I think that, this man Satoshi was a mathematical genius, basically of goodwill, I think. And he put it out there. And no, I don't think it's a psyop or a trap. But who knows what all these other thousands of currencies are?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, the thing that people have a hard time imagining that there is this mathematical genius that remained, nameless, or, no one knows who he really is, who put this piece of technology out there and sort of set it free into the world, and just happened to be really, really successful. The thing is that there actually are lots of things that really intelligent people put out into the wild and they just never get traction like this. So, this is, I think people go, well, what are the odds that somebody would create this thing and it would be big? Well, yeah, the odds are low that that would happen, but there's probably 100,000 really intelligent programmers who develop various pieces of code and put it out into the wild over the last 20 years. And, a couple of them work, a couple of them become big. And I think it's completely plausible that this could be one of those. I also think that from a standpoint of, I think people get too caught up in looking at it going, is this a trap? Is it designed to corral my money in this system versus being corralled in the, fiat money system? And I go, I mean, there is no total safe haven from, an overreaching government wherever you are, whatever asset you're putting your money in. And the fact is that there's been for a while, there's been a very compelling investment thesis or a speculative thesis around Bitcoin. And that's the issue with it. You don't have to be from my perspective, you don't have to be it doesn't need to be a religious thing. It's just that there's clearly, it has value because of its ability to be able to transact and move money or move capital across borders. That's valuable. It's scarce, and it has and the trend for it is interesting. So that's why I got into it. I'm not religious about it. I don't know. Even if it is a psyop, it's not necessarily. My money's so I have money in Wells Fargo and Bank of America and Bitcoin. Which one's the psyop? I don't know. I think
that's right. And you never really know what's going to be of lasting value. And of course, yes, gold has a long history of being of lasting value, and it's been doing very well recently. But there was a book, a sci-fi book written 10 years ago called The Unincorporated Man. I believe that was its title.
Yep.
And let me see. Basically, this guy puts himself in a time capsule where his body's maintained and he's resuscitated several hundred years in the future. And he's a billionaire. He has lots of stuff that's buried with him, like an Egyptian pharaoh. And the gold is basically worth nothing because of developments in nanotechnology and other things have made it possible to have all the gold that you want. So material things are worth almost nothing. It's a world of total abundance. But what is worth something are old digital watches that he has, and a wind-up Mickey Mouse Club clock and stuff like that. That are like heirlooms that are worth the equivalent of millions. So things change. It just depends on your time frame. And what is the motto for Zero Hedge, which is a pretty good website. It's
at a long enough timeline,
nobody survives.
Yeah, something like that. Yes, on a long enough timeline, actually, no one survives.
Yeah, actually, nothing survives is actually more accurate, even the stars themselves.
Right, and that's from the great movie Fight Club, is where that came from. But let's see. Last question, Doug. What are your thoughts on the coming grand solar minimum?
Well, I presume that it's going to arrive. These things appear to be cyclical, but there's I think as good an argument, better argument perhaps, can be made that the Earth is going to get cooler next, as opposed to warmer, which will be very intellectually gratifying for me anyway to see that happen.
Well, and that is the thesis behind the grand solar minimum.
Yeah. So, but we're dealing in geological time, so it may not be worthwhile planning your personal affairs around the next grand solar minimum or maximum, whichever it is, or for that matter, as the solar system rotates around the galaxy, that we go through some area that changes everything in that region of space, including here on planet Earth. It's all kinds of known unknowns and unknown unknowns that are out there. And the exact arrival of the next solar minimum, it's uncertain, it seems to me.
Yeah, I think we're technically in the beginning of it already, I think is what I've read about it. But the question is, what does it mean? I mean, what are the actual implications of it? Like, it's a solar cycle where the sun steps down a bit, but like, what are the actual implications on Earth? How much does it change the weather patterns? How much does it actually cool things? How much does it actually affect crop production? Those are impossible to predict based upon the sun cycle.
Yeah, probably the solar minimum, though. I mean, warmer is better. We get into a serious solar minimum. It's going to be mass starvation and much more use of energy, including fossil fuels, and a lower standard of living, and probably social chaos. So it's not going to be a good thing. I think global warming is actually a good idea, and actually higher levels of carbon dioxide are a good idea too, because what is carbon dioxide now? Is it like closing in, they say, on 400 parts per million, which is a teeny weeny amount. But I believe that I've read that the minimum that's required for the maintenance of plant life on the Earth is only 120. And in the past, it's been much, much higher than it is now. So I'm all for more carbon dioxide and global warming, both, which, should I ever show up at another cocktail party in Aspen, which I consider unlikely, he promised to make me a pariah at that party saying something like that.
Yeah, but weren't those all the megafauna and all that? Wasn't that during these periods where there was much more carbon, where the Earth was much warmer? You had these huge plants, right. And yeah,
much higher levels of carbon dioxide, maybe 10 times more or more than that,
Wow.
and lots of plants and big animals. And sure,
Yeah. That'd be cool. And it's not the end of the world, despite what
no,
Greta says.
not the end of the world, except for the kind of people that get hysterical. But the people that get hysterical about global warming are the same people that got hysterical about COVID, and will get hysterical about the next COVID, and are currently hysterical about Ukraine as being the most important country in the world. It's the same personality type. It's actually the same group of people,
Mm,
and
yeah.
they're mostly people that are talking heads. It makes me feel very uncomfortable being a talking head at this moment. But
You're not talking head. We're just two friends having conversation. I'm not talking
that's
heads.
all. Yeah.
So what do you think is it that the people who are the in a panic or frenzy about global warming and about or the COVID hysteria and all that, do you think they are really hysterical, like they're really actually worried about these things, or are they kind of like grifters who basically thrive on hysteria? You know what I mean? They're using hysteria as a tool for their own advancement, or are they actually just terrified of all these things?
Well, I think it's all of the above, actually.
Hmm.
My question is, how come it's these people? I mean, they say people are animals, okay? Which we are. We're a very involved type of chimpanzee. But what other species of animal elects the most stupid and incompetent of its herd or pack or whatever to lead the herd or pack? How does that happen?
Hmm.
Have we outsmarted ourselves that way?
It's just peak civilization here. We're just become really decadent, and we like abstraction so much. We just we're pushing ideas to the forefront rather than competency or physical power or whatever. I mean, it's all ideas at this point, and we've globbed onto a couple of really bad ideas and made them a social priority.
Yeah. And who knows how long that's been the case, because people have only been civilized since the first city arose in Samaria 5,000 years ago. It isn't that long ago
Hmm.
when you consider that 5,000 years, well, that's just the life of 50 centenarians strung together. I mean, and if you had 100 centenarians strung together, it's only 100 people that all could have known each other from the days of the very start of civilization. I mean,
Hmm.
we're just we're just babies. We're just a pup on the man, but we're
Yeah,
big
just
enough, strong enough to destroy ourselves. Maybe the Bolsheviks in Washington will give that a shot. They haven't tried that yet, destroying
could
the
happen.
world. Yeah,
Could
exactly.
happen. All right. Well, I think we'll leave that there for here, Doug, and we'll be back next week. Thanks for your time today.
Okay, Matt, have a good weekend. I had a little bit too much to eat and drink last night at the
Me
party,
too.
so I need the weekend to recover.
Yeah, sounds good. We'll be back sharp and ready to go on Monday. All right. Thanks, Doug.
Okay.